Hi everyone, McBeard here. Good to see you again. It's been a little bit, but I am back here with a video with my 5 upcoming balancing patch predictions for Gwent. Now, if you want to hear my full in-depth review of the patch with my boy Greyboxer, you can check out Commander's Horn podcast, the most recent episode, number 39. We spend about an hour talking about this patch. We go through each and every change and we talk about how it might actually affect the meta and how it actually might affect, the power level of each faction. So you can check that out at commandershorn.com, find it on iTunes or on a podcasting app that picks up our feed, like something like Downcast. Highly recommend it. Pretty proud of the episode. It's a 2-hour episode. You should definitely check it out. But let's talk about it right now because I have 5 very key things that I'd like to say about this patch coming up. So let's just jump right in. The first thing I want to talk about is the rise of monsters. I think monsters are going to rise, not necessarily to the top, but they're going to rise significantly in power because the thing is right now, monsters aren't a bad faction by any stretch of the imagination. Consume right now is commonly perceived as weak. I mean, I've been seeing this perception, but and Aridin is far less popular than Dagon in similar decks. Weather, though, when it comes to Dagon, is very competitive as it can usually produce more problems than most decks are able to solve, weather-wise. And they all include Skellige Harpies. All of the deck archetypes include Skellige Harpies, which are one of the most solid bronze cards in the game, I think you can say. Very reliable and very strong. Carryover is very strong in Gwent, as we know. And Dagon currently has top-tier decks built around him, her, it, right now. Currently, you can find Dagon at the top levels of the ladder and all the way up. I've tried playing it as well, and I know a lot of people are finding a lot of success with Dagon right now. And Dagon's going to get better already. So Aridin and Elder decks can be found, like at least rank 14 up. You can find them here and there, and they can beat you. But they're getting a lot of extra tools. And you take all of the stuff that they can currently do, which some people think is just not really as strong as the stuff that Dagon can do, but you're getting buffs across the board there. And you're going to see lots of units getting small buffs, but some are getting big buffs. So a card like Fiend, for example, is going up to 7. Now, this is already a silver card that can lock. Every faction has one. The Fiend's ability is actually cutting strength in half. So at 5, you're going to have to hit a pretty large unit to get kind of, that full-on silver value. But locking in itself is already a pretty strong thing. Fiend is going to go up to 7, which means that it's going to be a lot easier to get a high level of value from Fiend to the point where the lock is actually an extra. It's a bonus at that point. So a 7 strength unit that can lock, already clearly better than the neutral option in Cleaver, but it also has a strength reduction that ignores armor that gets better and better when you look at stuff like a lot of the growing units like Spotters, Vriad Vanguard, Reaver Hunters, Emperor Brigades, and Dolbothana Protectors. All of these units get cut in half, locked, plus you get a 7 strength unit on the board. I think Fiend right now is very fringe, and I think it's going to start to be, depending on the meta, depending on what's popular, you're going to see a lot more Fiend. I don't know if I'm going to say auto-include, but I'm going to say, it's usually really good to have a lock on hand. I think the Fiend is one of the better ones now at 7. Woodland Spirit is a really good card right now at 5, plus the 3 that you get from the Wolves, plus the Fog that you spawn on your opponent's row, plus the Foglets that you're probably already running in your deck. Woodland Spirit is a point better than Dagon when Dagon is creating Fog. Arguably similar in power level. They're buffing Woodland Spirit to 7. That means that you get 11 strength right off, plus the Fog, whatever damage that's going to do, and the Foglets. This card, you could argue, doesn't even need to be buffed. In fact, it's probably the strangest one. I think that this card is already very strong. I don't think he was too strong, but I think that he was... Woodland Spirit is a very easy card to fit into your deck. Very easy. You feel like you don't really have to give up very much to make Woodland Spirit work. The only deck in which you probably wouldn't run Woodland Spirit is a deck that isn't utilizing Foglets, but even then it's not so bad to get 8 strength on the board plus a Fog effect that's going to be doing damage every turn until your opponent can answer it. That's even without the Foglets, and they're buffing that by 2. So this is a strange one, but I think that this is going to become a really strong card. I'm curious if the buff actually is going to stick. It is a really strong buff, personally, to a very strong card already, and it's just definitely worth calling that out. And as I noted, Skellige Harpies, which are very strong cards, are not being changed. Dagon's also a very strong leader, the strongest leader with a 7 strength body, and he isn't getting changed either. So there's a lot of strong things that are staying put, and there's a lot of stuff that's being buffed around them. So I don't think we'll see a reduction in Dagon decks or an overall reduction in Dagon's power, but we may see rise to new archetypes that are built around Unseen Elder and Eridan, as there's now probably a few more opportunities to build reliably competitive decks. So now the monsters matchup can be much more varied. Right now, I think, for the most part, if you're looking at a pie, 90-95% of the time you go up against monsters, you're going up against Dagon right now, and that's probably going to be a bit more diverse. Overall, that is a good thing. Power level-wise, I guess we're going to have to see. But I think monsters are in a good place. They're underrepresented, but they're going to get better. Hopefully, they're not overrepresented. So let's move on to the second thing that I would like to say. Scoia'tael will not disappear. Even though Ethna spell decks are seeing some nerfs, and Francesca Mulligan decks are not seeing enough shifts in power to maybe make them viable. I mean, this is all on paper. This is just what we think. We're gonna have to see what happens with the patch. You got to play it. You got to see it. A lot of people were wrong about a lot of things in the past. Some cards are real sleepers, fly under the radar. I remember when the original King of Beggars was perceived as a weak card and ended up being one of the strongest cards in the game. The original King of Beggars, not the current one. Just an example. But the conversation around these two decks, Mulligan and Spell, and I think that they have had the most passionate discussion, has kind of allowed Brewer to quietly become the most dangerous deck in Scoia'tael. And Dwarves currently have dominating tempo, each turn punching you in the gut with huge swings in power. And now they're seeing small nerfs in Mahakam Guard, but I think that generally they're still going to be really strong. But there are some things to note about Scoia'tael's power level. All of Scoia'tael will feel the change to Roach, in which if the gold card is not played from hand, Roach will no longer come out. And the most notable situation where that is occurring overall in Gwent is when Saskia comes out. When you play your faction leader, if you have Saskia in your deck, she is played as well as a 7 strength gold, which also brings Roach out. Currently, that's how it works. In the future patch, it will not work like that. So the overall swing that Brewer has at any time at the beginning of the game, playing Brewer into Saskia, into Roach, into Barkley Els, or perhaps Dennis Cranmer, or perhaps into Yarpen Zigrin, that massive, massive first turn has been dialed back a bit. But I don't think overall in a longer round one you'll see overall power shifts occurring with Brewer, because you can probably expect the same level of power, because Zoltan, if you're running a Dwarven deck, Zoltan tends to be in there and tends to come out in round one as well. So Roach will eventually make an appearance. It's just not all going to happen at once in this giant avalanche of round one. In general, though, I think Brewer will remain very competitive and become the clear heaviest hitter in the Scoia'tael lineup, but it remains to be seen if these overall changes actually change the power level. Sometimes a deck like Scoia'tael Scoia'tael, or Scoia'spell, or whatever you want to call it, decks like that actually will excel the less popular they are, because of the way you have to play against that deck and the way you tech your decks based on what you expect to see. And if you don't expect to see Spell Scoia'tael and you run up against Spell Scoia'tael can beat you a lot of the time. So the fact that it's going to be receding in power may not actually reduce its power. It just means you're going to see it less and thus lose to it less. Brewer, however, I think is going to still be really, really strong. And we'll have to see. I think the jury's still out on Mulligan. Mulligan got buffs and nerfs, so we're going to have to see how that goes. But Brewer, I think, is going to be the king of Scoia'tael, and you're going to see a lot more Brewer. Currently, you're seeing a lot of Brewer. I see a lot of Brewer currently, and they really tax you. I've been playing Nilfgaard, and Brewer is one of the only decks that can potentially out-tempo John Calvert on a regular, consistent basis. So I don't think a lot of that is going to change. And I think that, a lot of players are very resourceful. A little nerf here, a little nerf there. Not a big deal. You can just find another way to be there. It just maybe encourages you to explore more. So let's talk Skellige. My third prediction is that Skellige is going to regroup and they're going to come back, but they're going to come back different. And I don't think that this is surprising, but when you nerf two archetypes that were abusing broken cards, like Brockvar Hunter and Savage Bear, you're going to probably find less people calling the Croc Hotline for easy wins. But it doesn't mean that these leaders are going to just stop existing. Croc and Brand both got hit really hard. But honestly, to anybody who's still currently playing Brockvar Hunter, shame on you. You're not doing yourself any favors. It's important to remember that the really filthy stuff that Skellige can do, with like buffing Morkvarg's base strength, playing Olgierd, countering weather, making huge late game plays with Priestesses of Freya, these things will likely not change. And a lot of these changes, although they do feel fundamental and they do feel very heavy-handed in some cases, these are just these may prove to be psychological, much like you just don't want to play a card that got nerfed. You just don't want to play it. Doesn't matter if it's still playable, although I do believe all cards are playable. You can put them in the deck and you can play them, they're playable. But psychologically, you're less likely to explore new options with a deck that everybody thinks is nerfed until somebody cracks the code and comes back with a new deck. And there are buffs to cards like Clan and Crate Warcrier where their effort, in which they are weakening themselves by 2, is now weakening themselves by 1. So it's kind of like a +3 buff to them when you're getting maximum value out of them. And other cards, like the Clan and Crate Warrior and Yetta and Damoon, are being buffed as well. And these are cards that seem to play within a self-wounding or basically like a red number buffing kind of deck. So these units are going to start off wounded at the value you see now, 8 and I believe it's 11. Ooh. I believe it's 11. It is 11. I quickly checked. But this also means that forgotten cards like Raging Berserkers or Berserker Marauder or Brockfire Archers may start to appear again now that they're no longer clearly inferior to the overpowered Brockfire Hunter. Queen's Guards will stop being late-game powerhouses as they are no longer veterans, so they do not gain strength over the course of the rounds. But this may end up all right. Perhaps you'll play them a bit more liberally, maybe for mid-round tempo and less of a late-game bomb. Different decks may find new strategies to make this card work, but I won't deny that cutting 6 overall strength off the combo isn't a huge nerf. It's a really hard card to change. Basically, these cards are played in 3s, and each round they were gaining 1, which is really like gaining 3 on the combo. So over 2 rounds, you're nerfing 6 strength, and it's just a tweak of 1 number. It's not even the base number. It's not even the number of cards that buff them. It's just tweaking 1 number, but each of those numbers is like times 6 every time. So it's really hard to balance this card, I think, but I think that this card should remain strong enough to consider. But generally, King Bran may find new ways to play. I think that there are a lot of ways to play King Bran, but Queen's Guards were clearly the strongest choice. With that being less clear, we may find that King Bran may have like a more discard-based, perhaps leaning back on warships or perhaps omitting Queen's Guards and ships altogether, and then just looking at a deck that can reliably thin and play their gold cards last. I think it remains to be seen what this may give rise to, but if you can reliably thin your deck and play really strong silvers and golds late game, and you know, Skellige has a lot of great bronzes to begin with, in Shieldsmith, Hayme, Scalds, Brockfire Archers, the Raging Berserkers. There's a lot of cards that aren't being played right now because cards like Queen's Guard, Brockfire Hunter, and Savage Bear are really, really strong. And they, in some cases, like the Brockfire Hunter, are far stronger than I think anyone ever intended them to be. So Skellige just they had this blockade of power that was really limiting exploration of the faction. So, like I said, Skellige is going to regroup, and they're going to come back. And you're going to see a lot less of them to start with, but I think that they're going to kind of come back in there. And if they don't, I trust CD Projekt Red will make the appropriate changes to make sure that we see a lot of faction balance, because, you know, in the closed beta, all the way up to like probably 45k MMR, you could see any faction, and any faction could do well. I think it's in the upper reaches where maybe stuff like Nilfgaard was dropping off, but you know, I think that a game that can achieve balance that closely to begin with, pay attention. They're going to get it right for sure. And who's to say that Skellige isn't spot on with this change already? A lot of people are calling doom and gloom on Skellige, but I think they're going to figure it out. But you're definitely going to see less of them. Number 4 is Nilfgaard, which is going to slow down but still remain very competitive. Now, on paper, Nilfgaard seems to lose a lot of numbers. They're losing 3 points overall on the Imperial Golems that come out with your leader. They're seeing 2 points lost on Tibor if you were playing Tibor Egebrocht. They're seeing 2 points lost on Peter Sar Gwenlev if you were playing that card, and you probably were. He is very strong. You're seeing 1 point lost on Calvet himself, who's going from a 4 to a 3. And Roach is no longer played if Calvet's able to pull out a gold with his leader ability. So if you open with a gold card, you're going to have overall less swing. Now, I mean, oftentimes you were happy to open up with an Emperor Brigade. So even though it sounds like a lot, it's still not going to be enough to really slow down Nilfgaard. And I don't think it's going to stop the representation of Calvet in the ladder. They still have a lot of great cards in that deck, and some of them are getting buffed as well. Take a card like Rainfarn, which is actually surging in popularity right now. I've been running him. I think he's really, really good, especially when you can play him from hand and get Roach out as well. It's an 11 strength play. You know, your best spy is 10. It's like a +1 spy, and he's deadly with Joachim when you have a late game and you've already kind of reorganized what you can draw with a Seer of Anahid. And, you know, all of these things are very strong and they're not changing, and Rainfarn's actually getting a buff to 7. So, you know, I think that... And golems are still very strong at 2. They've been reduced from 3 to 2, and they will still all come out with your leader as it is currently in live. It's just overall, with Calvet losing a point and all of the golems losing a point, you're losing 4 strength off your opening combo, which is very strong, but it's still very strong because thinning is going to remain as powerful as ever. I think overall, when you're looking at Nilfgaard, Morvran and Emir feel these changes the least, all of the changes to Nilfgaard. So I think that when it comes to the representation of Calvet, Morvran, and Emir, we're going to see roughly the same amount of representation, and Nilfgaard will still have very strong representation on the ladder. But future matchups between monsters in Northern Realms as they rise in popularity, as I'm predicting they will not always be favorable. In fact, it's not really clear how that's going to always feel. Right now, we know how Nilfgaard performs against Skellige and Scoia'tael and in the mirror. And of course, in weather monsters specifically matchups, at least I do. I've been playing some Nilfgaard, so I can tell you that those matchups are, you know, the thing about Nilfgaard right now is that there really aren't many bad matchups. You can find a way to win against any deck, but with these buffs and changes, we're going to see a lot more Northern Realms, and we're going to see different variations of monsters in Skellige. And, you know, Brewer is already kind of a tough matchup for Nilfgaard, because when it comes to actually high tempo plays, Brewer can go pound for pound with Calvet, and you also have to worry about all their carryover strength in Mahakam Guards and Yarpen if that's actually, you know, the deck you're up against. So making it that much more important to win the round, but still being able to fall behind very easily against Brewer. It may see that Nilfgaard struggles against the future meta, but I'm not going to say that they are going to be any less represented. I think that their deck is still going to be really strong. I think Nilfgaard as a whole is a very well-balanced faction with these tweaks in mind. The Rainfarn buff makes me raise my eyebrows a little bit, but I think it's okay. They are taking a lot of power away from Nilfgaard, so if they're going to give it back to you in a gold card, that is okay. I think that's going to be okay. I think that you can't just, you know, it's not like Northern Realms are just going to buff everything. You can't just nerf everything. They're keeping a lot of stuff in the game that's fun. They're making it a bit more fair, and, you know, I think time is going to tell. But we're going to have to see as this new meta develops. So now number 5, the last one, and likely the biggest one, in my opinion, Northern Realms will be the most complained about faction in Gwent. Northern Realms saw nothing but buffs, and they also got some quality of life improvements. Cards like Full Test and Kedweni Sergeant no longer buff the disloyal units in your deck, which is actually a benefit to your opponent, and machines got buffs all around, as well as a few new crewman tags added to units that didn't have them before, such as Blue Stripe Scout. So what this means is that you can build a more diverse and deadly deck of weaponry, as this faction has now been infused with power, deck building, and unit sequencing has been smoothed out. Northern Realms right now is already competitive because of how strong Reaver Hunters are. They're simple cards. You play them, they grow, and they win you the game. The strategy is getting to the end of round 3 with Reaver Hunters in your hand, or being able to source Reaver Hunters from somewhere. And the harder you try to stop Northern Realms from achieving this, the harder Northern Realms will find ways around being stopped. That's Gwent metagame. You find a counter, and then the deck has to combat the counters to show that it's still strong. And I think that Northern Realms will be able to do that a lot easier, since every other unit was buffed around this card, and this card wasn't changed at all. So Reaver Hunters have already been proven to be reliable enough to allow Full Test and Hensel to compete in the ladder. And people have been telling me in Twitch and on YouTube that they can't believe that I'm asking for a card like this to be nerfed when it's one of the strongest cards and really one of the only cards that Northern Realms has that allows them to be competitive. But yes, I understand that now. But you need to really read between the lines when you're looking at these buffs. Everything in Northern Realms is getting buffed. Everything, asterisk. Not everything, but lots of things. Reaver Hunters are one of the strongest bronzes in the game, period. And they alone allow Northern Realms to be competitive as they are. But imagine a world where 10 plus units in the faction are getting buffed all around this card, and this card is not changing. I guarantee you that the power level of Northern Realms will change how every deck in Gwent is made, because if you can't stop Northern Realms on their way to a Reaver Hunter blowout, you're going to find yourself crashing as more and more people take up arms with the Kings of the North and ask you time and time again, what? You don't recognize your own mates? And that's going to start being your trigger warning. It's going to be like Necker noises, or like the Vria Dragoon saying, onward, Fryhead, you know? It's going to be like that. You're going to hear these guys' voice line, and you're going to just shudder, because you're going to know that death is coming for you. This deck Northern Realms, I say this deck, but it could be many decks because you could put Reaver Hunters into any decks. They don't really require a lot of synergy. Yeah, you can play Nanik and you can shuffle them back into the deck. Yeah, you can play Reaver Scouts to ensure that they come out. Or you can just play Henselt and get all 3 of them in a single turn. You can do that now. But you can put these in any decks. Because if you play them enough, you're going to start playing 15, 16, 17 point Reaver Hunters. The trio isn't even important. The fact that they are just mammoth units that you can stagger is scary enough. So just look out for these cards, and I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong. Nobody would love me to be wrong more than me. But I see it happening. I see the whole thing. So we got to stream on Monday, so we're going to see maybe if this is actually an unchanged card. I think that it is scary to not look at this card critically. So that's all I got to say about Reaver Hunters. I think people think that I'm crazy for talking about this card so much because I think people just aren't seeing it enough. I don't know what it is exactly that people are just turning a blind eye to this card and say that it's not a big deal. It's a big deal. I'm stand by that, and I'm not going to change my mind. So that's it. Those are the 5 things. I mean, big surprise. It's all about the 5 different factions, but we're going to see how this ultimately pans out. We got CD Projekt Red with a live stream this Monday. Whenever you watch it, it's going to be this Monday on June the 12th. They're going to be going live at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. Central European Time. As that is their standard time to go live. And I don't know what they're going to say. They just had a live stream less than a week ago going over a bunch of changes. I guess they either left some stuff out, or they have some additional stuff to tell us, or there's a new thing that they're going to announce, and they just can't wait to tell us because they're a bunch of good guys. So I will be right there front row for that stream with you. But until then, thanks for subbing to my YouTube channel. More videos on the way, I promise. Felt like I was spreading myself a little thin, so I had to dial back somewhere. Unfortunately, YouTube, you took the brunt of it, but I'm back. So you're going to see a few more videos from me. And, you know, I'm still climbing in Gwent, still playing every day, and I continue to do that. So thanks again for watching. Thanks very much, guys. We'll see you real soon.